This is not a review. This is just a simple recommendation I am going to make. I'm going to assume you don't like jazz. You have listened to very little of it. And if you have listened to a bunch of jazz, you don't need to watch this because this will just be simple information that will be of no interest or use to you. So this is for people who listen to heavy metal and rock music and pop music. I have a simple recommendation. I would like to direct you to an artist called Don Ellis. He was a jazz musician and I discovered his existence through this book where his album Electric Bath was mentioned in this book, iPod Therefore I Am by Dylan Jones. This is well out of date. This I'm sure is now out of print, so let's ignore that. I just wanted to give you context as to how I discovered Don Ellis. So more than 10 years ago I bought Electric Bath because there was a strong recommendation in that book and it was excellent, really good, excellent stuff. But jazz is so intimidating, I never even bothered to investigate further, so I just let it go and didn't go any further until a few years ago when I got on the streaming services and I could indulge by looking around at the jazz section and I listened to more Don Ellis albums. So if you don't like jazz, you might actually like Don Ellis. His music is more eventful, less pretentious. It's probably technically incredibly complicated, but I cannot talk about that because I know nothing about music. Apparently there's lots of weird time signature stuff happening. No idea what that even means. It just means the pace, the tempos change, I guess. Anyway, it's very complicated, I'm sure, but as a non-musician, all I'm looking for is a bit of a groove, something actually happening in the music, and just something that's appealing and just sounds good, and that's what you get with Don Ellis. And I say that as someone who only listened to a handful of jazz albums. For example, a really good start point, the very cliched start point would be Dave Brubeck and his album Time In, or Time Out, Time In I think it's called, from 1959. That's a great album, but if you're into rock and pop music it might be a bit too sedate, it might not really grab you, whereas Don Ellis is a lot more rock orientated. He did the theme tune to the French Connection movie in 1971. He did the theme to the French Connection. So anyway, I'm just recommending to people who listen to rock and pop music who would like to maybe take a chance, dip a toe into jazz, that they might actually find something quite interesting in Don Ellis. And I'll put it to you this way, I don't like Miles Davis. He's the other obvious start point when people get into jazz. He's probably the most famous jazz musician. Kind of Blue, his album, is an uneventful bore. It's uninteresting. Now, someone who's really into jazz will be absolutely outraged that I would say that, but it's my opinion. I get nothing out of the album. It's just not of any value. It's of no use to me. Nothing happens in it. I just don't think it's any good. And I have Bitches Brew, which if you technically know what's happening with all the technical proficient time signature stuff, maybe you can get something out of that album. If you're just an uneducated listener who wants to listen to something that sounds nice and has a bit of a groove and has a bit of pace, a bit of get up and go and eventful things happen in it, there's nothing in it. It's the most ugliest sounding music. It's just a bunch of random noise. I think you would, if people are told it's such a cool piece of music. Oh, Bitches Brew, it's so cool. It's such a, it's like Apocalypse Now. It's cool, it's hip, it's the thing. And So I think a lot of people pretend to like it, but really don't. I think there's a lot of pretentious people being pretentious, listening to this pretentious music that is really just a bunch of random ugly noise that doesn't cohere into anything worthwhile. I think Bitches Brew is close to unlistenable, and I have heard it a bunch of times over well over a decade, and I have never developed any taste for Bitches Brew. So I would recommend Don Ellis. In particular, two albums are very, very, very strong. Electric Bath by the Don Ellis Orchestra and Soaring, which I think is 1972, and that's just credited to Don Ellis, in which he has a big band. On those two albums, he has like over 20 musicians playing on the track, so it's a lot of stuff. There's a real groove to it. There's a lot of up-tempo material on both albums. There's a sense of humour to Don Ellis. That's not to say he has funny sounds, but there's some over-the-top trumpet playing, or there's some kind of like crazy, kind of swaggering western themed sounds or something. I detect humour, and it's not ha-ha humour, but it's like a, hey, we're doing something a wee bit odd kind of humour. There's something humorous about Don Ellis. It's not too serious. It's approachable. It's not intellectual. It's not fancy pants musicianship with no melody or anything. And even the slower, lower tempo songs hold your attention. I think it's called Nicole. It's very, very pretty, and not in a overtly look at how pretty this is kind of way. It's, as I say, it's kind of unpretentious, straightforward. So Electric Bath, which I think is maybe 1969, and Soaring, which I think is 1972, those are exceptional albums which I listen to all the time. I would also strongly recommend, but it's definitely a notch below those two albums, Connected, or Connection. It was an attempt, I believe, to make a more commercial, mainstream album. It has a lot of covers. It has a cover of a Yes song, Roundabout. It has Jesus Christ Superstar. It has the French Connection theme on it. Anyway, it was an attempt to make a more mainstream hit. I don't think it was very successful, didn't do what they hoped it would do, but it's actually a really good album. But it's definitely a notch below those other two. And then the rest of his catalogue is fine. It's more traditional jazz. There's strong material here and there, but in my opinion it's a bit more patchy. So I personally wouldn't massively recommend those. Those are fine. The point of this video is for me to say to people who listen to rock music and pop music that these three albums by Don Ellis are really worth a shot. Electric Bath, Soaring, Connection. I hope I did not annoy you too much. I am not a music critic. I have no technical expertise on the subject of how music is played and recorded, and I certainly know next to nothing about jazz. All I wanted to do with this silly little video was to say, hey, you have a streaming service, you have access to all this music, give these three albums by Don Ellis a shot. You might actually like them, even if you don't like jazz. The only thing you really need to have some taste for is instrumental music. On the film Whiplash, there's a song called Whiplash, which is the opening track of Soaring. It was not written by Don Ellis, and I have no idea what the history of the song is, if someone else recorded it first or whatever, but all I know is that in this movie they play the song, or try to play the song Whiplash, about 50 times, and there is a damn good version of Whiplash as the opening track on Soaring. and Whiplash is a great track. So if this is usually on Netflix or Amazon Prime, so it's a decent movie. I'm not crazy about it. I don't think it's that great because ultimately it's just a movie about a guy learning to play drums with a ridiculous over-the-top teacher who he should really just say, "Oi, get lost. Your teaching methods are terrible." So anyway, Whiplash, great song, and you can get a great version of it by Ellis on the album Soaring.